All right. All right, so a couple of things. Let's see. Let's go to Moodle for a second. Let's see, where did I put it? Here we go. All right. So I'd originally hoped to go over both the Chapter 9 problem set and the sample midterm number 2 today, but sadly enough, I didn't finish writing the second sample midterm until late last night. So why don't we do this? We'll do the Chapter 9 problem set today, and we'll save the second sample midterm until Thursday. That still gives us plenty of time to get the second midterm done. So let me just quickly show it to you for a second. Now remember, the second midterm is on chapters 5 through 9, and then the rest will be 11 and 12, I believe. So or no, 10 and 11. No, I think it's 10 through 12. Oh, let me go look. I shouldn't. Let me go make sure. That's right, 10 through 12. All right, so here we go. So the first test was based on the first 4 chapters. The second test is 5 through 9, which is what we did the other day. We did chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 problem sets. We'll do 9 today. We'll do the sample midterm on Thursday. And then I'll post the actual midterm, and we'll discuss that on Thursday. And then the final exam, which will be sometime in early to mid-May, will cover just 10, 11, and 12. So it's not comprehensive, in other words. So that should be something that gives you a little relief. Just the last 3 chapters will be on the final exam. Now, in the meantime, what is on the second sample midterm? Well, it's just exactly what we've been doing in chapters 5 through 9. This time there's a lot of fill-in questions and a few problems and 1 or 2 graphs, the normal stuff that we've been doing. So we'll take a look at that on Thursday. In the meantime, the chapter 9 problem set is fairly quick. We'll take a look at that. Everything, yes, absolutely. Everything is take home. Everything is still take home. So, all right, yes, this chapter 9 problem set, mostly it's definitional. Yeah, it's all definitional because that's the type of chapter that it was. So why don't we go through this right now, and then we'll get back into chapter 11, which is our discussion about money, the most exciting topic in the world, money. All right, so let's begin at the beginning. So we're going to look at the growth rate of real GDP. All right, so how do we do this? How do we calculate the change in real GDP? Well, it's a percentage change that we're actually calculating. All right, so for example, here we have the GDP, real GDP went from 19 trillion up to 20 trillion in 1 year. So what we're seeing here is the 2020 real GDP minus 2019 real GDP, all divided by 2019 real GDP. And at the end, you can multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percentage. All right, that's the only reason it's there. So now real GDP in 2020 is 20 trillion. We don't have to write all the zeros. Let's just call it 20. Real GDP in 2019 was 19. And then we divide that by 19 times 100. So we've actually got 1 over 19 times 100, which is 0.0526 or 5.26%. That's how much real GDP growth was in 2020, which is very rapid, by the way. I think we mentioned so far that the goal is to keep it around 3%, maybe 4% per year. Anything beyond that potentially risks increasing the rate of inflation. But it's still a cause for celebration because output is growing then very quickly. Now, when we start moving over into the territory of real GDP per capita means per person, okay? It's Latin, per head, basically. So what we have to do this in 3 phases, or 3 stages, I guess. We need to know each individual year's real GDP per capita. So the way they do this is 2019 real GDP divided by the 2019 population, which would be 19 trillion over 310 million. Now, I just wrote it out in words instead of with zeros, but if you put this in your calculator, you'll see that the per capita is then 61,290. We'll do the same exact thing in 2020. So for 2020, we had 20 trillion over 320 million. And that works out to be 62,500. So that's per person. Every person in the US generated on average $62,500 worth of goods and services during the year. That's pretty good. It's not at the highest in the world, as we know. It's only about 7th, but it's still not too shabby. Now, with that information in place, what we're going to see here, though, is that the growth rate requires us to do what we did in part 1, the growth of real per capita GDP is very similar to what we just did. What we're going to do, as you can see from up here, we're taking 2020 real per capita GDP and we're subtracting 2019 real per capita GDP, and then we'll divide all of that by 2019 real per capita times 100. All right, so we're going to use the numbers we just calculated. $62,500. Okay. All right, and so after all that's done, it turns out to be 1.97%. All right, so while real GDP went up over 5%, the population grew fairly quickly during that period. So on a per capita basis, it only went up about 2%, basically. So most economists think that that's a better measure of our standards of living, but they both are valid ways of looking at it. In other words, this is the growth in output. This is the growth in output per person. Okay. So both of these numbers are reported by the BLS. And so whichever number you take the most seriously is the one you can look at, but that's how they're calculated. All right, now the rest of these I think are just qualitative questions. Potential real GDP is the value of real GDP that would result if all resources are used as efficiently as possible. Okay, usually with that, I mean, the way they actually calculate it is what would be real GDP if we had no cyclical unemployment. Okay, so that's essentially, in practice, that's what they're looking for. What could we do? What is possible? Okay, given the resources and technology that we have at the moment, what is possible? What's the limit we could reach? And that's, of course, what we should be striving for. But of course, it doesn't always work out that way. Now, 4, what could possibly lead to an increase in potential real GDP over time? In other words, potential real GDP grows over time. And in other words, our potential standard of living is growing over time. And there's really 2 main reasons why this can happen. So it only asks for one, but I'll list them both anyway. We could have more labor, or simply more people working, more output can be produced. And number 2, if instead there's the same number of people, but they're more productive, either one of these would increase our potential real GDP. Either more people working or people working more efficiently. That would do the job. So productivity growth is a very important component of our standards of living. If productivity growth is low, then the economy becomes sluggish and it doesn't grow. Whereas if productivity is growing quickly, then output can grow rapidly and we can all have higher standards of living. So what is it that it contributes to an increase in the supply of labor then? Well, if each individual worker works more hours, that would do the job. Okay, you spend more time on the job. An increase in the employment to population ratio. In other words, a larger percentage of the population is working. And an increase in the working age population. So as more people are, let's say, as the growth rate of the population goes up, if more and more babies are born every year, eventually those babies will join the workforce, and before you know it, we have a larger supply of labor.
Excuse me just one second.
Yes.
So could the answer also be the supply of labor can grow over time through education and training, or?
Well, that would be lumped under the category of that would be productivity though. And so that means the output could grow, but we're talking here specifically about the amount of labor that's being performed rather than how efficient it is, just how much actual work is being done. So the better education would increase the productivity of labor, and that would raise potential real GDP, but the supply curve of labor would not increase because people are better educated, because it's just that you're working smarter than, but not more hours, let's say. So they are really 2 different things. But yes, we want more education because that raises productivity and that raises output. I mean, if everybody that you met has a PhD in something or other, then the society would be very, very well educated and we'd all be producing something extremely important. And so that would mean standards of living are extremely high. So definitely more education raises our standards of living through productivity, but not necessarily through the quantity of labor that's being used or the supply, that is. Okay. Anyway, so what is the impact on the real wage of an increase in the supply? Now, for this, if you don't remember, you can draw a little curve or graph. So we have a labor supply and demand curve, just like we do for every other good in the economy. The difference is that the price is expressed as the real wage. The price of hiring labor is the real wage. Down here, we have the quantity of labor. That hasn't changed. Quantity is down here. And so we have an upward sloping supply curve, but we'll call it LS. Downward is LD for demand. They have the traditional shapes. The labor supply curve goes up because the more you can earn by working, the more you will want to work, of course. Demand, the more expensive labor is, the less will be hired. So that's why they have their traditional shapes. So if we start out here, I'll call this W, let's say, and this will just be Q, okay? So an increase in supply, as you would expect, reduces the price of labor. And so you can see from this graph that the more workers there are, the cheaper their wages will be typically. Okay, so an increase in the supply of labor. Oh, so I forgot to write it out. I just have the graph here. An increase in the supply will result in of labor will reduce the real wage. Okay, because there's more people competing for the same jobs. That's basically the bottom line. Now, the aggregate production function, we didn't really spend that much time looking at this thing. It's basically is meant to represent the output of all goods and services in the economy. The word aggregate is a fancy word for total. Just keep that in mind. Aggregate simply means total. So this is the total output that we're producing. And here's the quantity of labor that was used to create that. It slopes up, but it slopes up in a progressively decreasing rate to represent or illustrate the fact that we do experience the law of diminishing returns in the short run. All right. Otherwise, it would be a straight line. And what happens if we have more productive labor, like everybody has more training or knowledge or experience or education, then the entire curve shifts up. And it should have more or less the same shape, unless something else is going on. Pretty much, this is what you would expect to see when labor becomes more productive. We can have more output for every quantity of labor. So the aggregate production function shifts up as labor becomes more productive. And you can see that that results in a higher level of real GDP for any quantity of labor that we use in the economy. And that's excellent news. Okay. Productivity. Okay. That's the important detail. When it comes to standards of living, it ultimately comes down to productivity. Okay. Now, 8. Oh, so this is similar to what we had before. We're asking here what happens to wages when the demand for labor goes up. All right, so let's do that same graph. And quantity of labor. Now, as usual, we have the upward sloping labor supply, downward sloping labor demand. And this time, what changes is there's suddenly an increase in the demand for labor. Now, that probably was caused by an increase in productivity, most likely, although not necessarily, but that's often the reason why more labor is demanded, because the productivity is going up, more output is being produced. And guess what? Not only does that increase GDP, as we saw earlier, but wages go up as well. So, man, this productivity is pretty cool. It makes everybody better off, as you can see. We have higher wages, more output, and it raises our standards of living. So that's why productivity is so important. Now, what is one possible cause of this happening? Well, we can have, there's a few possibilities, but increases in saving and investment in physical capital. Now, why is that? Because the more capital we have to work with, the more productive we can be. Or the better the capital. In other words, imagine that you're working at a Starbucks and they don't have enough blenders or enough bean grinders and all the rest. Then people will be standing around waiting to use the equipment. So more equipment means higher productivity for labor. But that equipment has to be financed with investment, which in turn is financed through people's savings. Without savings, there'd be no investment and the economy would stagnate. And then also, of course, this is what we mentioned earlier, increases in human capital, which of course means education, training, experience, et cetera, increases in human capital, and also improving technology, which raises productivity. So these are all very excellent things. The more that we have of this, the better. Okay, that's what we want to see. So if you read in the Wall Street Journal that productivity growth accelerated last month, you should be jumping up and down, because that means the society as a whole is going to benefit. Everybody benefits from improving productivity. All right, so classical growth theory. Remember, this is our very pessimistic friend, Thomas Malthus. All right, remember he told us that output cannot grow faster than the population, which means we'll always be living in grinding poverty, no matter what we do. Ooh, well, that was pretty pessimistic. But remember, at the time, productivity growth was incredibly low, and it had been throughout basically all of human history. It was really only right after this period, when the Industrial Revolution got going, that productivity growth started to really accelerate. So yes, he was being pessimistic, but yet at the same time, though, he was basing his analysis on just what he observed from recent history. For all those centuries, that's exactly how things worked. Oh, so anyway, now with new classical theory, new growth theory, and this is coming later on when we have the benefits of seeing the Industrial Revolution in action. With new growth theory, increasing output, increasing technology and productivity will increase real GDP per capita, and therefore standards of living will rise. So you notice how they're not even just saying that real GDP will go up, it's real GDP per capita. So no matter how fast the population grows, the output can grow even faster. As long as technology continues to improve and productivity rises, there's no reason why we can't have more people and higher standards of living at the same time. So yes, I think we'll agree which one turned out to be right. Now, how can policymakers stimulate growth? Now, this is coming back to Washington. Policymakers means the Congress, the president, and the Federal Reserve System, which we'll be talking about in Chapter 12. There's several things we can do. Creating incentives to innovate, save, work, acquire new skills. And a lot of this can be done through the tax code. All right. Encouraging research and development by corporations. And how do they do that? Often with tax codes, they say, listen, if you're going to spend a lot of money developing new products, we know how risky that is. So we'll give you tax breaks to develop new products, and because you never know what your discoveries might lead to. Improving education, of course. The more educated we are, the better off we'll be, because we'll have a better sense of what to do with our resources. All right, we'll be better skilled at using them. And of course, it also might mean we can discover new resources as well. In fact, right about now, we have the largest proven oil reserves in history, whereas even 50 years ago, there's all kinds of talk about how we would run out of oil by the beginning of the 20th century, or 21st century. And of course, that never happened. But anyway, one more. Encouraging international trade and specialization. In other words, take advantage of comparative advantage. Means do not interfere with trade. Okay, because we know that with comparative advantage, all output can grow throughout the world. All right. So that's it for this chapter. It wasn't that long. So then, of course, like I said, we'll go over the actual sample midterm number 2 on Thursday. And of course, in the meantime, I'll post these solutions. Now, if you recall in chapter 11, we had been starting to look at different forms of money. All right. And I showed you my special presentation about historical forms of money. We learned about the different functions that money requires in order to act as a form of money. In other words, any asset that provides the following functions: medium of exchange, store of value, and unit of account, could be defined as a form of money. So it's a pretty broad definition. This is something that economists have come up with. But I mean, at any given point in time, typically we think of money as, like right now, we often think of money as pieces of paper, those green pieces of paper in our wallets. We think of them as money, and they are, but they're not the only way that money could be used. In other words, there's other forms of money that have been around in the past and will probably be around again in the future, like this Bitcoin thing. It may be in the future that the only form
That
of
class is boring. I was gonna.
So Bitcoins, I forgot, we had this conversation once, didn't we, about Bitcoins? I think, was that this class?
Yeah,
Wasn't there-
we were just talking about it. It came from an island that you showed us last class. It was called Yap.
Oh, that was the stone money of Yap. Yeah, that one is very unusual and fun, but Bitcoin is that digital coin thingy that people are all talking about, but nobody understands what it is. But I mean,
Actually, I think if you cut the coin, into separate pieces, that's what's called Bitcoin, right?
no, I don't think so. No, it's something completely different than that. No, you're thinking about the Spanish silver dollar. Remember, yeah, let me show you that slide again. Out of sheer desperation during the colonial days, when there was just not nearly enough gold and silver to create enough coins for the US, Spanish silver dollars were circulating as money in the US because they had a lot of silver in them. And so in those days, all that people cared about was anything that has silver in it could be construed as a form of money. But what about change? And so this is what happened. People took to breaking them up into pieces to create change because there simply weren't enough smaller coins floating around. No, Bitcoin is this digital technology that it's all the rage, and you never know if it starts to catch on, it could actually replace dollars like we have today, but it's hard to say. But right now, at this point in time, paper money, those green pieces of paper in our wallets, is considered to be the official form of money. In fact, if you look at a dollar bill, now a lot of people do not look at their paper money very carefully. There's a sentence on there somewhere that is very important. Let's see if I can find a picture of a dollar bill on the internet. I want you to see this. It's a very important detail. Okay, well, first of all, it says Federal Reserve note, which means it's been issued by the Federal Reserve System. But more specifically, I don't know how big we can make this. There it is. Right there, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. What that means is that you cannot refuse to accept dollar bills in exchange for goods and services. In other words, imagine yourself going to a store and they say, you're trying to give us paper money. We only take Bitcoin here. They're not allowed to do that legally. It's required by the government that everybody accept the dollars. Not just the ones, of course, all the dollar bills, because it says so right there. It's not backed by gold or silver. It's backed by confidence in the US government. So as long as we all agree that this is money, well, then the system works very well. In fact, it must work very well because more than half of our paper money actually circulates in foreign countries. Why is that? Why would foreigners be willing to hold US dollars? It's all about the confidence, okay? So there's a lot of fun details on this dollar bill that we'll be looking at later on. But if you notice, there's a lot of Latin on here, a lot of Latin. In fact, down here, although it's barely readable now, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means out of many one, meaning that the 13 colonies, which had previously behaved as almost independent countries, were able to band together and create one new country. So that's what that's doing over there. Over here, the eagle has 13 arrows in one claw and 13 olive branches in the other claw, which means that we're willing to make peace with anyone, but don't mess with us because we also have the ability to fight back with these arrows. So there's all kinds of fun stuff on here. And nobody knows why this pyramid is here in the first place either. That's a mystery for another day. But it's issued by the Federal Reserve System. The serial number uniquely identifies that note. This note, the actual paper money is not printed by the Federal Reserve System. They distribute it, but it's printed at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington, which you can actually visit, or at least depending on the coronavirus, you can actually visit the US Bureau of Engraving and Printing and watch this being done. I've actually done it, although it was a long time ago. You walk in the door and they're printing the money. And they have enormous stacks of it. Oh, look at this. They've got all, if you weren't sure what they're using, look at this. You can tell now this is what the current $2 bill looks like because they have it right here. Now they've retired. By the way, they used to have paper money that was larger than a $100 bill. They've been retired recently, but there used to be a $500 bill, 1,000, and of course we saw already the highest, the $100,000 gold certificate with Woodrow Wilson's picture on it. But there had been a $10,000 note. This, by the way, is Salmon P. Chase. He was once the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, and he is also the founder of, as you probably can guess, Chase Manhattan Bank. And we have here a $5,000 bill with James Madison on it, who of course is considered to be the father of the US Constitution. And then we have a $1,000 bill here, this is Grover Cleveland. Does anyone know what distinction he holds as a US president? What did he do that nobody else has ever done? Ooh, we need to brush up on our US history, don't we? I'll tell you what he did. He won 2 terms, but not in a row. He won, then he lost, and then he won. So he is considered to be the 22nd and the 24th president of the United States. That's never happened since then. And that was the first time, and it hasn't happened since. And then one more, the $500 bill. This is William McKinley. And of course, sadly enough, he was assassinated, and that's how Teddy Roosevelt became president. So these were in circulation. I don't remember when they were removed. Let's see, it doesn't say. But these also have been in circulation in recent history. I mean, during the 20th century. So, wow, that's kind of cool. But you can go right in there and watch them make the money. Okay, now of course you can't have any, but you can watch it being done. It's very interesting. And then the coins, though, on the other hand, are made at the US Mint. Does anyone know where our 2 US mints are located? Oh, okay, I'll give you a 2. Philadelphia is one of them, and the other one is?
San Francisco?
Okay, now San Francisco is a mint, but at the moment they're only making commemorative coins. So that's correct, but not at the moment. They're only at this moment only making commemorative coins. But in the past, they also minted coins. There's another one though. Who knows where it is? I'll give you a hint, Rockies.
Denver?
Oh, it's Denver. Yes, it is in fact Denver. And in fact, the only time I've ever visited Denver, I thought, it'd be fun to go in there, and because I've been to the Philadelphia Mint. And so I thought, oh, how cool would that be to go to the Denver Mint? So I walked up to the door and said, I would like a ticket for the tour. They said, oh, are you on the waiting list? I said, no. And they looked and they said, this list is a year long. There's a year waiting list to get into the Denver Mint and see what they do in there. That surprised me to no end. I think it's because it's a great place for schools to take class trips to. That's really what the big attraction is. The Federal Reserve banks, some of them have their own museums of money, like the ones in Philadelphia and in San Francisco, which we've been talking about. So anyway, what we're going to do now, just because I think this is, well, all right. So I have this cool series of videos that I would like you to see. Wow, look at this. This dollar bill costs $2. Interesting. No, you know why? Because it's uncirculated. That means it's in pristine condition, and collectors will pay $2 for it. Man, some of these other ones though, ooh, $45 for this 20. Yeah, it's just a standard 20. It must be in absolutely immaculate condition though. But anyway, so I have this series of videos which traces back through history, the history of paper money itself, not just American paper money, but all paper money, because as you can probably imagine, paper money is a relatively recent innovation. For all those centuries, gold and silver were considered to be the form of money, the only really useful form of money. But at some point, it became clear that paper money could work under certain conditions, of course. So we're going to watch these videos. It's a series. There's 5 or 6 small parts to it. And when we're done with that, we can dive back into the notes and start considering how money is measured. In other words, how much money is there in the United States? How much money is circulating within our borders? That's an interesting question. In fact, it's a very important question because the policymakers at the Federal Reserve Bank have to know this. Oh, there's all this talk about, yeah, Andrew was supposed to be replaced by Harriet Tubman. I don't know whatever came out of that. I think they somehow along the way kind of got lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. I don't know if that's ever going to happen now. There was all this discussion about it, and then somehow it just never happened. But you know how bureaucracies are. They're slow, very, very slow. So who knows what's going to happen with that? But it's possible. But there doesn't seem to be any active discussion about it right now. All right, so let's watch these cool videos about the history of paper money, and then we can get back to our serious discussion. I mean, well, it's not that this isn't serious, but our notes about how money is measured and how the money supply is defined. All right, so let's check this out. So it's in 5 or 6 parts, but each one is fairly short. All right, so let's check this out. All right, here's part 1.
You did not send that to everyone.
Oh, you know what? I know what happened. This happens to me all the time. If somebody sends me a private message, I almost without fail forget to send it back to everybody. So I'll take care of that now. Thank you for pointing that out. I've done this a million times before and I still never seem to learn. All right.
I do it too.
It's it's too easy. Did it get there this time?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, let's check it out.
Professor, when will the midterm be?
Sorry, what was that?
When will the midterm be?
Oh, I'll post it on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Ooh, so far, pretty good, huh? Even kind of exciting. All right, so now I guess we're ready. Now, some of this stuff we've already covered, of course, but it's good to see it all together as one big story, let's say. So let's look at part two now. All right, hold on one second. All right, here it is. Hmm. All right, well, we're zooming along through history now. All right, let's keep going. We want to know how this turns out, don't we? All right, part 3. Okay, I think we're ready for part 4. All right, let's check this out. All right. So here comes part 5. All right, so this is the sixth and final part. And now we're going to resolve this mystery of how this happened. How did we get to paper money from gold? All right, here we go. All right, so that was the last part. Now, so don't forget, since we have to go now, on Thursday, we'll be going over the second sample midterm, and then we'll get back to chapter 11. All right? So I'll see you all then.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
See you later.